Hello, dear readers. Welcome to an extraordinary journey through time, where the human heart reveals its deepest truths. Today we're going to travel to the vast horizons of Montana in the year 1889, where the wind whispers secrets among the golden fields and where lost souls find their way back to love. This is a story about second chances, about the transformative power of forgiveness, and about how true love can flourish even in life's most barren soil. You will witness how two wounded hearts meet in a delicate dance of healing and hope. Where are you watching from? Leave me your city in the comments. I want to know each one of you embarking on this journey with me. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave that special like. It helps me so much to continue bringing these soul-touching stories. Now, close your eyes for a moment and imagine. Montana, 1889. The small town of Willow Pass where civilization meets the wild frontier, and where our story begins, under the infinite sky of the American frontier. Year 1889, Willow Pass, Montana Territory, United States. The train whistled 3 times before stopping at the small Willow Pass station, and with it came an icy wind carrying the smell of snow and broken promises. Mary Catherine Sullivan adjusted her shawl over her shoulders and descended the wooden steps with the silent dignity of one who had learned to carry heavy burdens without showing their weight. Samuel Whitmore waited on the platform, holding a faded photograph between his calloused fingers. The 38-year-old man had broad shoulders curved by time and harsh winters, and his blue eyes scanned each passenger disembarking. When Mary Catherine approached, he discreetly compared the image with the woman before him. It wasn't her. Definitely not the 20-something woman from the photograph. Mary Catherine perceived the confusion in his gaze before Samuel even said a word. She had lived long enough to recognize disappointment when it danced in a man's eyes, but she didn't lower her head or murmur apologies. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and waited. "Are you the lady?" Samuel hesitated, tucking the photograph into his wool coat pocket. "Mary Catherine Sullivan," she replied, her voice carrying the slight Irish accent that years in Texas hadn't managed to completely erase. "I believe you were expecting someone else." Silence stretched between them like a fragile bridge over an abyss. Snowflakes began to fall, settling on Mary Catherine's brown hair, already silvered at the temples, and on Samuel's dark hat. The station gradually emptied, leaving only the two of them and the distant echo of the departing train. Samuel observed the woman before him. She wasn't young, wasn't the mail-order bride he had carefully chosen through letters exchanged over months. But there was something in her posture, in the way she kept her hands clasped over her small, worn leather suitcase, that awakened a reluctant curiosity. "Where do you plan to stay tonight?" he asked finally, more out of courtesy than genuine interest. Mary Catherine looked around the small town stretching beyond the station. A few wooden houses, a church with a white steeple, a hotel that seemed to have seen better days. The next train wouldn't pass for 3 days. "I had thought of the hotel," she said simply. Samuel followed her gaze and knew Martha Jenkins's establishment well. Freezing rooms, bad food, and gossip that spread faster than fire in dry grass. The idea of leaving a woman alone there, even if she was a stranger, didn't sit well with his conscience. "You may spend the night at the farm," he offered, surprising himself. "Tomorrow we'll discuss the next steps." Mary Catherine studied his face for a long moment. She saw the reluctant kindness, the loneliness he carried like a second skin, and something deeper that she recognized because it also lived within her, the pain of one who had lost more than they should. "I appreciate your kindness," she replied. Samuel's wagon was simple but well-maintained, pulled by 2 horses that clearly knew their way home. During the 40-minute journey along the dirt road, they exchanged few words. Mary Catherine observed the landscape unfolding before them, golden fields stretching to the distant mountains, wooden fences marking properties, and occasionally a solitary house smoking against the grey sky. The Whitmore Ranch gradually emerged on the horizon, and Mary Catherine felt her heart tighten. It was a large 2-story house with a porch that embraced the entire front facade. But there was something abandoned in its appearance, as if life had slowly withdrawn from it, leaving only the physical structure to witness better times. The front garden was covered with dry leaves, the windows fogged by accumulated dirt, and some porch boards groaned under the weight of the wind. It was a house that had once known laughter and now knew only silence. Samuel helped Mary Catherine down from the wagon, his fingers briefly touching hers. For an instant, both felt the human warmth that solitude had extinguished from their lives. "It's not much," he said, almost apologetically. "It's a home," Mary Catherine replied, and there was genuine truth in her voice. While Samuel tended to the horses, Mary Catherine climbed the porch steps, her footsteps echoing on the worn wood. She stopped before the main door, noticing how the paint was peeling and how the curtains inside seemed to have been closed for a long time. When Samuel joined her carrying her suitcase, Mary Catherine turned to him. "How many years have you lived alone?" The question came so direct and gentle that Samuel almost dropped the luggage. No one asked him such things. No one cared enough to ask. "4 winters," he replied, his voice hoarser than he intended. Mary Catherine simply nodded, as if the answer explained everything she had observed. Loneliness left visible marks on a house as much as on a person. Samuel opened the door and the smell of dampness and neglect greeted them. The interior of the house confirmed what Mary Catherine had already intuited. It was a place where someone existed, but didn't live. "The guest room is upstairs," Samuel said, lighting a lamp. "I'll prepare something for dinner." But Mary Catherine had already moved toward the kitchen, where dirty dishes accumulated in the sink, and the table was covered with unopened correspondence and cigarette ashes. "May I cook?" she asked. "I like to cook." Samuel observed her for a moment. There was a natural authority in her movements, a silent competence that suggested years of caring for homes and people. He nodded, while Mary Catherine explored the pantry and organized ingredients. Samuel went upstairs to prepare the guest room, but his steps slowed when he passed the closed door at the end of the hallway. James's room, still locked after 4 years. He went downstairs and found Mary Catherine already working in the kitchen. She had opened the windows to air out the space, lit the wood stove, and the smell of sautéed onions was beginning to replace the smell of abandonment. "Mrs. Sullivan," he began. "Mary Catherine, please." "Mary Catherine, you need to understand that this situation is temporary." She continued cutting vegetables, her hands moving with economical precision. "I understand perfectly, Samuel. May I call you Samuel?" He nodded, watching how she transformed simple ingredients into something that was beginning to smell like home. "Tomorrow we'll discuss your plans," he said. Mary Catherine stopped cutting and looked directly into his eyes. "I don't have plans, Samuel. It's been a long time since I've just followed wherever life takes me." The brutal honesty of the statement enveloped them in silence. Outside, the wind increased in intensity, making the windows rattle, and Mary Catherine resumed her work as if she had said something about the weather. They dined in silence, but it was a different silence from the one Samuel knew. It wasn't the heavy silence of loneliness, but the comfortable silence of two people who didn't need to fill every moment with empty words. When Mary Catherine went up to the guest room, Samuel remained in the clean kitchen, looking around as if seeing the space for the first time in years. The table was organized, the dishes washed and put away, and a small vase with dried flowers that she had found somewhere was positioned in the center of the table. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but for the first time in 4 years, Samuel Whitmore didn't feel completely alone in his own house. Upstairs, Mary Catherine knelt beside the bed and opened her suitcase. Among the few carefully folded clothes, her fingers found an envelope yellowed by time, a letter she had written 24 years earlier and never had the courage to send. She put it away again and lay down, listening to the nocturnal sounds of a house that was slowly remembering how to shelter life. Dawn arrived wrapped in golden mist, and Mary Catherine woke to the distant sound of Samuel tending to the animals. She dressed quickly and went downstairs, finding the kitchen exactly as she had left it the night before, but with the addition of a dirty coffee cup in the sink. She prepared fresh coffee, and when Samuel returned from the stable, found her on the back porch, watching the vast field that stretched as far as the eye could see. "Good morning," he said, accepting the cup she offered him. "Good morning, Samuel. Did you sleep well?" It was a simple question, but Samuel couldn't remember the last time someone had cared about the quality of his sleep. "Yes. And you?" "Mary Catherine." She corrected him gently. "And yes, I slept very well. How long has it been since you heard the sound of someone moving around the house?" The question caught him off guard again. This woman had the disconcerting habit of making observations that touched the center of his loneliness. A long time, he admitted. They drank coffee in silence, watching the sun rise over the fields. Mary Catherine noticed how Samuel kept his shoulders tense, as if he were permanently prepared to carry some heavy burden. "Do you need to talk to someone about my situation?" she asked eventually. "There's no one to talk to." "Family." Samuel hesitated. "A sister-in-law. Margaret. But she lives in town." Mary Catherine nodded, catching something in his tone that suggested Margaret wouldn't be a welcome presence in the discussion about the temporary stranger's stay. After breakfast, Samuel prepared to leave. There was work on the property that couldn't wait, fences to repair and cattle to check. "I'll be back by noon," he said, hesitating at the door. "If you need anything—" "I'll be fine," Mary Catherine assured him. Alone in the house, she began a careful exploration. It wasn't invasive curiosity, but the natural instinct of a woman who had spent her life caring for homes. She observed how dust accumulated on furniture, how curtains had lost their color, how small repairs were needed in various places. Mid-morning, without asking permission or making announcements, Mary Catherine began to work. She found a bucket and cleaning rags in the kitchen closet. She opened all the windows on the ground floor, letting fresh air sweep away the smell of abandonment. She started with the living room, carefully removing each object, cleaning it, and placing it back in its place. There were photographs on the mantelpiece, all turned face down. Mary Catherine gently turned them upright. One showed a younger man she recognized as Samuel, next to a blonde woman with a gentle smile. Another showed the same couple with a dark-haired boy with bright eyes. She didn't ask questions of the photographs, just cleaned them and left them facing up. In the kitchen, she organized the cabinets, discovering fine china that clearly hadn't been used in years. She washed each piece carefully, admiring the delicate floral patterns that told the story of a woman who had chosen beauty for her home. Outside, she found a small abandoned garden. What had once been organized flower beds were now tangles of weeds, but Mary Catherine could see the original design. There were roses that needed pruning, an herb bed that could be recovered, and some perennials that had survived the neglect. When Samuel returned at noon, he stopped at the property entrance, sure he had come to the wrong house. The windows were open, white curtains fluttered in the breeze, and there was a smell of home cooking floating through the air. Mary Catherine was in the front garden, kneeling among what had been a flower bed, her hands dirty with soil as she carefully removed weeds with meticulous care. She looked up when she heard the horse's hooves, and Samuel saw there was a small smudge of dirt on her left cheek. "I hope you don't mind," she said, indicating the garden. "I couldn't resist." Samuel got down from the wagon slowly, his eyes sweeping over the changes. The clean windows reflected the afternoon sun, the porch had been swept, and through the open door he could see that the living room was gleaming. "You didn't need to," he began. "I know," Mary Catherine interrupted gently, "but I wanted to. I like taking care of things." She stood up, brushing the dirt from her hands, and Samuel noticed how the work had brought color to her face. There was a quiet satisfaction in her movements, as if caring for the house had fed something within her that was hungry. "There's soup on the stove," she said, "and I found bread in the pantry that was still good." They had lunch in the transformed kitchen, and Samuel found himself observing every detail of the changes. The dishes he hadn't seen in years were organized in the glass-fronted cabinets, the window plants had been watered, and even the kitchen towels seemed whiter. "Why are you doing this?" he asked finally. Mary Catherine stopped with her spoon halfway to her mouth. "Because a house needs to be cared for to stay alive, and because—" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Because it's been a long time since I've had a house to care for." The simple confession floated between them. Samuel began to understand that this woman wasn't simply killing time while waiting for the next train. She was doing what she knew how to do best, transforming a space into a home. During the afternoon, while Samuel worked in the nearby fields, he could hear sounds coming from the house, running water, the rhythmic beating of rugs being cleaned, and occasionally Mary Catherine humming softly an Irish melody that his mother used to sing. It was a sound the house hadn't heard in 4 years. When the sun began to set, Samuel found Mary Catherine on the back porch, watching the distant mountains painted gold by the evening light. "Tomorrow is Sunday," he said, sitting in the chair next to hers. "Yes, there's a church in town. If you'd like to go—" Mary Catherine smiled, but it was a melancholy smile. "Thank you. But I think God and I have better conversations outdoors." Samuel nodded, understanding. He too had stopped attending church after losing Elizabeth and James. Prayers seemed to echo emptily in a broken heart. "Mary Catherine," he said after a moment, "why did you really come to Montana?" She remained silent for so long that he thought she wasn't going to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. "Because I had nowhere else to go. And because sometimes when we lose everything, the only possible direction is forward." That night, after Mary Catherine went up to her room, Samuel remained in the kitchen, looking around at a space that had become unrecognizable in just 2 days. It wasn't just the cleaning or organization. It was something more subtle. The house was breathing again. He went upstairs slowly, and when he passed James's room, he noticed the door didn't seem as heavy as it used to. Maybe it was imagination, but the presence of life in the house was softening even the deepest pains. In the guest room, Mary Catherine was brushing her hair in front of the antique mirror. Through the thin wall, she could hear Samuel moving in his room, and she wondered what kinds of nightmares disturbed the sleep of a man who had lost so much. She put away the brush and took out the letter from inside her suitcase again. 24 years of regret weighed as much as paper could weigh. Outside, the night wind whispered through the fields, carrying the scent of flowers she had begun to free from the weeds. It was a perfume of hope, of things that could grow again with the right care. And for the first time in many years, Mary Catherine Sullivan fell asleep believing that maybe, just maybe, there was still time to fix what had been broken. On the morning of the 3rd day, Mary Catherine discovered Samuel's office. It was a small room on the ground floor that he clearly avoided, as it was covered by a thicker layer of dust than the rest of the house. Papers accumulated on the dark oak desk, accounting books remained closed for months, and a leather chair showed signs of use abruptly interrupted. While organizing the papers, her fingers touched something cold hidden under a pile of correspondence. It was a silver picture frame, turned face down. Mary Catherine lifted it carefully and felt her heart tighten. The photograph showed a boy of maybe 8 years old, with dark hair like Samuel's and bright eyes full of mischief. He was mounted on a small horse, smiling with the uncomplicated joy of childhood, but the glass of the frame was cracked right down the middle, cutting the boy's face in two. Mary Catherine held the frame for a long moment, feeling the weight of the pain Samuel carried. She knew intimately the kind of break that came from losing a child, though her loss had been by choice, not accident. Carefully, she removed the cracked glass from the frame. In the desk drawer, she found a magnifying glass that Samuel used to read contracts, and in the kitchen closet, she located a roll of fine adhesive tape. She worked with the patience of one who knew that some broken things could be repaired, as long as one was careful enough. Aligning the glass fragments with millimetric precision, she applied small pieces of tape to the back, creating an invisible web that held the parts together. It wasn't perfect. The crack was still visible, but the boy's face was whole again. She was so concentrated on the work that she didn't hear Samuel enter the house for lunch. He stopped at the office door, watching Mary Catherine bent over the desk, her delicate hands working on the frame as if she were performing surgery. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. Mary Catherine startled, almost dropping the frame. When she turned, she saw something in Samuel's face she hadn't seen before, pure vulnerability, as if she had touched an exposed nerve. "I was organizing the office and found this," she said softly, holding up the frame. "The glass was cracked. I thought I'd fix it." Samuel approached slowly, his eyes fixed on James's photograph. It was the first time in 4 years he had seen his son's face without the cruel cut of the crack dividing it in half. "You didn't need to," he began, but his voice failed. Mary Catherine stood and walked to him, carefully extending the frame. "He had beautiful eyes," she said simply, "like yours." Samuel accepted the frame with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. The crack was still there, a fine line across the glass, but James's face was unified again. He could see the boy's complete smile, the joy in his eyes, the promise of a future that never came. "It was James," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "My son was?" The gentle question opened a floodgate that Samuel had kept closed for 4 winters. The words poured out of him like a confession that had been waiting to be made. "He died at 8 years old. Pneumonia. Elizabeth, my wife, and died 6 months later. She couldn't live without him." Mary Catherine didn't say the empty words of comfort that people usually offered. She didn't say he was in a better place or that God had a plan. Instead, she did the only thing that mattered. She stood there, present and silent, allowing the pain to have space to exist. "They died in winter," Samuel continued, his eyes still fixed on the photograph. "James first, then Elizabeth. The house became so quiet I almost went mad. I started breaking things, plates, mirrors, windows, as if destroying objects could ease the pain." He looked at Mary Catherine then, and she saw tears in the blue eyes that he wouldn't let fall. "I broke the glass of this frame on a particularly difficult night. Later I regretted it, but I left it that way. As a reminder. A reminder of what? That some broken things can't be fixed." Mary Catherine extended her hand and gently touched his arm. "But some can," she said softly. "Maybe not perfectly, but they can be repaired enough to still serve their purpose." Samuel looked at the photograph again. The crack was still there, a permanent scar in the glass, but it no longer prevented him from seeing his complete son. It was a metaphor that didn't go unnoticed. "Why did you do this?" he asked. Mary Catherine hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Because I've lost a child too, and I know what it's like to carry that pain alone." The confession floated between them like a fragile bridge. Samuel studied her with new eyes, recognizing something familiar in the way she held her own body, as if protecting an old wound that had never completely healed. "Lost how?" Mary Catherine looked away, focusing on a point beyond the office window. "Not the way you imagine. My loss was different, more complicated." Samuel waited, but she didn't elaborate. There were secrets in Mary Catherine Sullivan that she wasn't ready to share yet, and he respected that. After all, he himself had secrets he kept buried. "Thank you," he said finally, holding the frame against his chest. "For fixing it. It was the least I could do." That afternoon, Samuel placed James's photograph back in its place on the living room mantelpiece, next to Elizabeth's photograph. For the first time in 4 years, he didn't avoid looking at them when he passed by. Mary Catherine continued working in the garden, and Samuel watched her occasionally from the office window. There was something reverent in the way she cared for the plants, as if she understood that everything that grew deserved a second chance. When the sun began to set, he found her kneeling beside a rose bed that had been completely overtaken by weeds. "Do you think they'll survive?" he asked. Mary Catherine looked at the mistreated plants, their thorny branches intertwined with invaders, but still showing signs of life at the tips. "Roses are more resilient than they seem," she said. "They can survive almost anything, as long as they still have strong roots." She stood up, brushing the dirt from her hands, and looked directly at him. "Just like people." That night after dinner, Samuel remained in the living room looking at James's repaired photograph. The crack in the glass seemed less pronounced in the soft lamplight, and for the first time in 4 years, he managed to remember the sound of the boy's laughter without the memory being accompanied by tearing pain. Upstairs, Mary Catherine was brushing her hair in front of the mirror, thinking about the look on Samuel's face when he saw the fixed photograph. She knew that look. It was the same one she saw in her own reflection whenever she thought about the son she had given to strangers 24 years ago. Some repairs were possible. The question was whether she would have enough courage to try to fix her own broken life, or if she would spend the rest of her days simply helping others repair their losses. Outside, the night wind whispered through the roses she had begun to free, carrying the promise that with care and time, even the most neglected things could bloom again. The elegant carriage appeared on the farm's driveway on a Thursday afternoon, raising a cloud of golden dust that seemed to announce trouble. Mary Catherine was in the front garden, pruning the roses she had freed from the weeds, when she saw the vehicle approaching. It was a quality carriage, pulled by 2 well-cared-for bay horses with polished metal finishes that gleamed in the sun. It definitely wasn't the type of transport that common farm visitors would use. Samuel emerged from the stable, wiping his hands on a rag, and Mary Catherine noticed how his shoulders tensed upon recognizing the carriage. She straightened slowly, an old instinct of self-preservation awakening in her gut. The woman who descended from the carriage was everything Mary Catherine had imagined she would be upon hearing the name Margaret. Tall, elegant, dressed in a traveling outfit of dark fabric that cost more than many families earned in a year. She had blonde hair carefully arranged under a hat, ornamented with feathers, and carried a lace parasol that clearly had never been used for real sun protection. Margaret Caldwell examined the farm with critical eyes, her gaze sweeping from the stable to the house, pausing notably when she spotted Mary Catherine kneeling among the flowers. "Samuel," she said, her voice carrying the authority of one accustomed to being obeyed, "I hope you have an explanation for the rumors that have reached my ears." Samuel approached slowly, like a man walking toward his own judgment. "Margaret, I wasn't expecting your visit." "Clearly not," she replied, her gaze fixing on Mary Catherine. "Or perhaps you would have taken measures to clean up the situation before my arrival." Mary Catherine stood gracefully, removing her gardening gloves and smoothing her apron over her simple dress. There was no way to avoid this encounter, so she decided to face it with the dignity she had cultivated through years of facing difficult situations. "You must be Margaret," she said, approaching with measured steps. "I'm Mary Catherine Sullivan." Margaret examined her from top to bottom with the kind of cold evaluation that women of her social class had perfected. She saw the silver hair at the temples, the hands calloused from work, the dress well cared for but clearly not new, and formed her conclusions immediately. "Miss Sullivan," Margaret said, making it clear from her tone that she didn't consider it appropriate to use the title Mrs. without formal confirmation of marriage. "I must say that your presence here has caused considerable speculation in the community." "I imagine it has," Mary Catherine replied calmly. Samuel stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable. "Margaret, Mary Catherine is my guest. She arrived under unusual circumstances and—" "Unusual circumstances," Margaret repeated as if savoring the words. "That's an interesting way to describe the situation. An unknown woman living alone in a widowed man's house, without kinship or—" She paused dramatically. "Proper supervision." Mary Catherine felt blood rise to her face but kept her voice controlled. "I can assure you, Mrs. Caldwell, that my presence here is temporary and completely appropriate." "Temporary?" Margaret arched a perfectly lined eyebrow. "And how long does this temporariness last?" "A week," Samuel replied before Mary Catherine could speak. Margaret turned to him with the expression of someone who had just proven an important point. A week. A single woman, living under the same roof as a single man for an entire week. "Samuel, have you completely lost your sense of propriety?" "She's not a single woman," Samuel said, and Mary Catherine felt something contract in her stomach. "She's a widow." Margaret looked at Mary Catherine with renewed interest, but not of the benevolent kind. "A widow, naturally. And where were you living before your convenient arrival in Montana?" Mary Catherine recognized the interrogation for what it was, an attempt to find something in her past that could be used against her. "Texas," she replied simply. "Texas is a large state, Miss Sullivan. Could you be more specific?" "Mrs. Sullivan," Mary Catherine corrected gently but firmly, "and I lived in various cities over the years." It was an answer that answered nothing, and all three people on the porch knew it. Margaret smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. "How convenient! A mysterious woman with a vague past appearing at the door of a grieving and wealthy man. I'm sure you can understand why that raises questions." Samuel stepped forward, his patience clearly reaching its limit. "Margaret, that's enough. Mary Catherine helped me with the house, and I won't accept her being treated with disrespect." "Helped with the house," Margaret repeated, looking around the property with sharp eyes. And Mary Catherine saw the exact moment when Margaret perceived the changes. The clean windows, the organized garden, the flowers in planters that clearly weren't there during her last visit. "I see she's been useful," Margaret said, and there was poison in the word useful. "What an interesting arrangement. A housekeeper who isn't a housekeeper living as— what exactly?" "As a guest," Samuel said firmly. Margaret laughed, a crystalline and cold sound. "Samuel, dear, you were always too naive for your own good. But this goes beyond naivety. This is pure scandal, and it's reflecting directly on the Whitmore family reputation." Mary Catherine saw the change in Samuel's face. The mention of family reputation had touched a nerve, as Margaret clearly expected it would. "What do you suggest?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. "I suggest that Miss Sullivan, Mrs. Sullivan, find more appropriate accommodations. There's a respectable boarding house in town where women in her situation can stay until making other arrangements." Mary Catherine felt humiliation burn in her veins, but kept her head high. "I understand your concern, Mrs. Caldwell. Perhaps it would be better if I left." "No," Samuel said, surprising both women with the firmness of his voice. "You're not going anywhere." Margaret looked at her brother-in-law with genuine surprise. "Samuel, Margaret, I appreciate your concern for the family reputation, but this is my house and Mary Catherine is my guest. As long as she wants to stay, she'll be welcome here." The silence that followed was tense, as a violin string stretched to its maximum. Margaret studied Samuel's face, recognizing a determination she hadn't seen in him for years. "I see," she said finally. "So you've chosen this path." "I've chosen to treat a decent woman with the respect she deserves." Margaret tucked away her parasol with precise and deliberate movements. "Very well, Samuel, but don't say you weren't warned about the consequences. Willow Pass society isn't as flexible as you apparently have become." She headed toward the carriage but stopped and turned back to Mary Catherine. "Mrs. Sullivan, a word of advice from woman to woman. Men in mourning sometimes make impulsive decisions. Decisions they regret when the period of suffering passes. It would be wise not to confuse temporary kindness with something more permanent." Mary Catherine met Margaret's eyes directly. "Thank you for the advice, Mrs. Caldwell. I assure you, I have no illusions about my situation." Margaret nodded, apparently satisfied for having planted the seed of doubt she intended to plant. "Samuel, I hope to see you at church on Sunday, alone. It would be appropriate to demonstrate that you still maintain some standards." With that, she climbed into the carriage and departed, leaving a cloud of dust and tension in her wake. Samuel and Mary Catherine remained on the porch, watching the carriage disappear down the road. The silence between them was charged with unspoken things. "I'm sorry," Samuel said finally. "Margaret can be difficult." "She cares about you," Mary Catherine replied. "In her way. She cares about appearances." Mary Catherine turned to look at him. "Maybe she's right. Maybe my presence here is causing problems you don't need." Samuel studied her for a long moment. "What do you want, Mary Catherine? Do you really want to leave?" The simple question carried enormous weight. Mary Catherine thought about the small boarding house in town, about rented rooms and familiar loneliness. Then she looked toward the house behind them, which had begun to feel alive again. "No," she said honestly, "I don't want to leave." "Then don't leave." But both knew that Margaret's visit had changed something. Mary Catherine's presence was no longer a temporary and private arrangement. Now it was a public matter, with all the complications that implied. That night, during dinner, they spoke little. Each was lost in thoughts about what the future might hold, and whether two people with pasts so full of secrets and pain could really build something new together. Outside, the night wind carried the scent of the roses Mary Catherine had tended with such care, but it also carried the feeling of storm approaching on the horizon. 3 days after Margaret's visit, Mary Catherine was preparing peach preserves in the kitchen when she heard the sound of horse hooves approaching. It was mid-afternoon, and Samuel was working in the distant fields, so she dried her hands on her apron and went to the porch to see who was arriving. The rider was young, maybe in his late 20s, with dark hair and broad shoulders that suggested a life of physical work. He rode a chestnut horse, with the confidence of someone who had spent much time in the saddle, but there was something in his posture that indicated nervousness or uncertainty. When he dismounted and approached the porch, Mary Catherine felt something strange move in her chest. It wasn't recognition exactly, but a disturbing familiarity that she couldn't identify. "Ma'am," he said, removing his hat and revealing hair that was almost black, with waves that refused to be completely tamed. "I'm looking for someone. Perhaps you can help me." "Of course," Mary Catherine replied, descending the porch steps. "What can I do?" The young man hesitated, as if he wasn't sure how to formulate his question. "I'm looking for a woman who may have arrived recently in the region. Her name is Mary Catherine Sullivan." The world seemed to stop. Mary Catherine felt as if all color had drained from her face, and she had to grab the porch railing to keep from swaying. Why are you looking for this woman?" she managed to ask, her voice coming out weaker than she intended. The young man studied her carefully, noticing her reaction. "It's a personal matter, very personal. Do you know her?" Mary Catherine looked at his face, the dark eyes, the strong line of his jaw, the way he held his hat between his hands. and felt 24 years of guilt and regret crash over her like an avalanche. She began, but the words refused to form. The young man stepped closer, his expression becoming more intense. "Ma'am, please. I've been searching for a long time. If you know anything." Mary Catherine closed her eyes for a moment, fighting against the emotion that threatened to overflow. When she opened them again, she saw that the young man was watching her with growing suspicion. "What's your name?" she asked, though she already knew the answer in the depths of her heart. "Benjamin Sullivan." Ben. The name she had chosen for him 24 years earlier, written carefully in a letter she had left with the nuns at the San Gabriel orphanage. Benjamin, meaning son of my right hand. A name that carried hope for a future she couldn't give him. "Benjamin," she repeated, and there was so much weight in the way she said the name that the young man startled. "Do you know anything about Mary Catherine Sullivan?" he insisted. Mary Catherine looked at the son she had given to strangers when he was just a few days old. She saw traces of herself in his face, but also features that must come from his father, a man who had died before even knowing he would be a father. Every maternal instinct she had suppressed for 2 decades awakened at once, screaming for her to embrace him, to tell the truth, to ask forgiveness for the lost years. But fear was stronger than love. Fear of his rejection, of his anger, of having to explain choices she herself could barely understand. "No," she said, the lie burning her throat like acid. "I don't know anyone by that name." Benjamin studied her for a long moment, and Mary Catherine had the disturbing feeling that he could see through her lie. "Are you sure? Because you seem to know the name." "It's a common name," Mary Catherine said, hating every word that left her mouth. At that moment, Samuel appeared coming from the fields, clearly having seen the strange horse on the property. He approached with the natural caution of a man who lived in isolation. "Can I help you?" he asked the young man. Benjamin turned to Samuel, and Mary Catherine felt a moment of panic. What if he asked Samuel about her? What if Samuel, in his natural honesty, told the truth? "I'm looking for someone," Benjamin said. "A woman named Mary Catherine Sullivan. I asked the lady here, but she said she doesn't know anyone by that name." Samuel looked at Mary Catherine, confusion evident on his face. She met his eyes and did something she had never done. She silently pleaded. She pleaded for him not to reveal who she was. Samuel studied her for a moment that seemed eternal. He saw the panic in her eyes, the desperate plea, and something in him recognized that there were secrets here that were too important to be exposed lightly. "No," he said finally. "I don't know anyone by that name." Benjamin looked between the two, clearly sensing that there was something not being said. "Are you sure? Because I have information that she may have come to this region recently." "Where does this information come from?" Samuel asked. Benjamin hesitated, then took out a yellowed envelope from his coat's inner pocket. "I have a letter she wrote a long time ago. It mentions Montana as a place she might go if circumstances changed." Mary Catherine recognized the envelope immediately. It was identical to the one she carried in her own suitcase, the letter she had written to her son when leaving him at the orphanage, explaining her reasons and expressing her love. She had left 2 copies, one with the nuns and one for herself, as an eternal reminder of her choice. "May I see the letter?" Samuel asked. Benjamin hesitated again, then shook his head. "It's very personal. But I can say that Mary Catherine Sullivan she's my mother, biological mother. I'm trying to find her." The silence that followed was thick as fog. Mary Catherine felt her legs weaken and had to sit on the porch steps to keep from falling. Samuel looked toward her with new understanding, the puzzle pieces fitting together in his mind. The pain she carried, the vague references to the son she had lost, the way she had reacted to James's photograph. "I'm sorry," Samuel said to the young man, "but we can't help you." Benjamin put away the letter but showed no signs of leaving. "May I ask a question? Do you 2 live here alone?" "I'm a widower," Samuel said carefully. "Mary Catherine, Mrs. Sullivan, is my guest." Benjamin startled visibly. "Mrs. Sullivan? I thought you said you didn't know anyone by that name." Mary Catherine stood up slowly, forcing stability into her trembling legs. "Sullivan is a common surname," she said. "I didn't think it was relevant to mention that I also carry it. It was technically true, but everyone knew it was a half-truth at best. Benjamin studied her intensely. "What's your full name, ma'am?" Mary Catherine felt as if she were on the edge of a precipice. "Mary Catherine Sullivan." The words floated in the air like a confession. Benjamin stepped back, his eyes widening. "You," he began, but then seemed to struggle with the impossibility of what he was thinking. "No, it can't be. She would be younger. And the first name, it's Mary Catherine, not just Mary," she said quickly. "And I'm 42 years old. How old would your mother be now?" Benjamin did the mental calculations. She would be about 42 years old." Silence stretched between them, charged with possibilities that neither dared verbalize. Finally, Benjamin shook his head, as if convincing himself of something. "No, it can't be too much of a coincidence. There must be hundreds of Mary Catherine Sullivans." "There must be," Mary Catherine agreed, hating herself for every word. Benjamin mounted his horse, but hesitated before leaving. If by chance you meet someone with that name, someone who might be who I'm looking for, could you let me know? I'm staying at the hotel in town." "Of course," Samuel said. Benjamin rode away, but turned several times to look back, as if something bothered him deeply about the entire situation. When he finally disappeared from view, Mary Catherine collapsed on the porch steps and began to cry. They were tears she had suppressed for 24 years, tears of regret, of unexpressed love, and of the tearing pain of being so close to the son she had lost, and not being able to reach out to him. Samuel sat beside her, saying nothing, just offering his presence as comfort. After a long moment, he spoke softly. "That's the son you lost." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Mary Catherine whispered, "that's my Benjamin." And as the sun set over the golden fields of Montana, a mother wept for the son who was so close she could touch him, but as distant as the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. The 3 days that followed Benjamin's visit were the longest of Mary Catherine's life. She moved through the house like a ghost, fulfilling her daily tasks with mechanical efficiency, but her mind was constantly at the hotel in town, where her son waited for news she couldn't give. Samuel watched her with growing concern. He had seen her transformation after the revelation, how color had disappeared from her face, how her hands trembled when she thought no one was looking, how she stood on the porch every afternoon, looking toward town. On Thursday morning, Samuel found Mary Catherine in the kitchen, preparing coffee with automatic movements, staring out the window as if expecting to see Benjamin appear on the road at any moment. "You couldn't sleep again," he observed, noticing the dark shadows under her eyes. "I slept a little," she lied. Samuel poured coffee for both and sat at the kitchen table. "Mary Catherine, you need to talk to me. About Benjamin. About what happened." She turned to him and Samuel saw a vulnerability in her eyes that she rarely allowed to show. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. How you lost your son. Why you lied to him. Why you're torturing yourself like this." Mary Catherine sat slowly, wrapping her hands around the warm cup as if seeking warmth to heat something much deeper than her fingers. "I was 18 when I became pregnant," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I had been married for only 6 months to Thomas Sullivan. He was a good man, worked for the railroad in Texas. We were starting our life together, planning our future." She stopped, staring at the coffee as if she could find courage in the dark depths of the liquid. "Thomas died in a work accident when I was 7 months pregnant. A derailment. It happened so quickly we didn't even have time to say goodbye." Samuel felt his heart tighten. He knew the pain of sudden loss, the cruelty of fate that stole loved ones without warning. "I was left alone, no family, no money, no means to support a child. The house where we lived belonged to the railroad company, so I lost my home too. Some neighbors took me in out of charity, but I knew I couldn't abuse their kindness indefinitely." Mary Catherine stood and walked to the window, observing the garden she had tended with such love. "Benjamin was born in December during a terrible snowstorm. It was a difficult birth, and afterward I knew I could never have children again. He would be my only child, my only chance to be a mother." Samuel waited, knowing she needed to tell the story at her own pace. "For 3 weeks I tried to care for him. I lived on others' charity, sleeping in barns, looking for work I could do with a baby in my arms. But it was January in the middle of winter, and Benjamin was always sick, always hungry. I didn't have enough milk because I myself was malnourished." She turned to Samuel, tears shining in her eyes. "One night, He almost died of cold. He was blue when I woke up, barely breathing. That's when I knew that my love for him wasn't enough, that sometimes loving someone means letting them go. The orphanage, Samuel said softly. The San Gabriel orphanage. The nuns were kind. They said many families wanted babies, especially healthy boys, that he would have a good life, education, opportunities I could never give him. Mary Catherine returned to the table, but didn't sit. I wrote a letter explaining my decision. I explained that I wasn't abandoning him for lack of love, but for too much love. I left 2 copies, one with the nuns to give him when he was older, and one for myself as a reminder. The reminder that Benjamin has. Yes. In the letter, I mentioned that if someday circumstances changed, if I had the means to care for him properly, I would try to find him, and that if that wasn't possible, maybe I would go to Montana, where my grandmother had grown up. It was the only place I knew besides Texas. Samuel began to understand the complexity of the situation. So he's not just looking for you. He's looking for the possibility of family, of belonging somewhere. Yes. And I can't give him that. Why? Mary Catherine looked at him with surprise. How can you ask why? Look at me, Samuel. I'm a 42-year-old woman, without my own resources, living on the charity of a man who barely knows me. What kind of mother would I be now? Samuel stood and approached her. A mother who loves him enough to have made the most difficult choice a woman can make. A mother who carried the pain of that choice for 24 years. A mother who is willing to lie to protect him, even though it's tearing her apart. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. I understand that you're afraid. Afraid he'll reject you. Afraid he won't understand your choices. Afraid of opening your heart again only to have it torn from your life a second time. Mary Catherine began to cry, silent tears she had been holding back for days. He seemed so strong, so independent. He clearly had a good life, was well cared for. Maybe it's better to leave things as they are. Or maybe, Samuel said gently, it's better to give him the choice. Let him decide if he wants to know the mother who loved him enough to let him go. That afternoon, Mary Catherine was in the garden when she saw Benjamin approaching again. This time, however, she didn't run inside the house. Instead, she remained among the roses, her hands trembling as he dismounted and approached. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, removing his hat, "I hope you don't mind another visit. I've been thinking about our previous conversation." "Of course," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady. Benjamin studied her carefully. "There's something about you that bothers me. Something familiar I can't identify." Mary Catherine felt her heart race. "Familiar how?" "I don't know. Maybe the way you hold your hands when you're nervous, or the way you tilt your head when you're thinking. My adoptive mother used to say I did the same thing." The comment was like a punch to Mary Catherine's stomach. Even without knowing her, he had inherited her mannerisms. "People sometimes resemble each other," she said weakly. Benjamin nodded, but continued observing her. "Mrs. Sullivan, may I ask a very personal question?" Mary Catherine nodded, not trusting her voice. "Did you have children?" The question floated in the air between them like a bridge Mary Catherine could choose to cross or burn. "Yes," she said finally. "I had a son." "Had? Did he die?" Mary Catherine closed her eyes for a moment. "No, he didn't die. I lost him in a different way." Benjamin stepped closer, his eyes widening with a possibility that was beginning to form in his mind. "What kind of different loss?" And Mary Catherine Sullivan, who had lied to protect her son for 3 days, discovered she could no longer sustain the lie when she looked into the dark eyes that were so similar to her own. "The kind of loss," she said, her voice breaking, "where you give your baby to strangers because you believe they can give him a better life than you ever could." The silence that followed was absolute. Benjamin stared at her, his face going through a series of emotions. Shock, understanding, disbelief, and something that might have been hope. "You're her," he whispered. "You're Mary Catherine Sullivan, my mother." And finally, after 24 years of silence, Mary Catherine nodded and said the words she had dreamed of and feared, saying, "Yes, I'm your mother, Benjamin." And not a single day passed that I didn't think of you. Benjamin remained motionless for a long moment, as if the world had stopped spinning. Mary Catherine could see the whirlwind of emotions passing through his face, shock giving way to understanding, understanding transforming into something that seemed like anger, then confusion, and finally something she couldn't identify. "You lied to me," he said finally, his voice low but charged with emotion. "You looked me in the eye and lied." Mary Catherine felt every word like a blade. "Yes, I lied." "Why?" The simple question carried the weight of 24 years of abandonment, and Mary Catherine knew her answer could determine whether she would have any chance of a relationship with the son she had found again. "Because I was afraid," she said honestly. "Afraid that you would hate me. Afraid that you had come all this way just to tell me how much better your life was without me. Afraid of having to explain choices I myself can barely understand." Benjamin began to pace back and forth, his hands opening and closing as if he were trying to grasp something that kept escaping. 24 years, he said. 24 years wondering who you were, why you abandoned me if you were still alive. And you were here all this time. Not all this time, Mary Catherine corrected gently. I only arrived here 2 weeks ago. Before that, I lived in Texas trying to build a life that would justify the choice I made. Benjamin stopped pacing and stared at her. What life? Did you remarry? Did you have other children? No, she replied. I never remarried, and I couldn't have other children. You were my only chance to be a mother, Benjamin. My only chance, and I gave it away. The pain in her voice was so deep that Benjamin felt something move in his chest, despite the anger he was trying to maintain. Then why did you do it? If I was your only chance, why did you give me to strangers? Mary Catherine sat on the garden bench that Samuel had built under the rosebush she had tended, and gestured for Benjamin to sit beside her. After a moment of hesitation, he joined her. Because you were dying, she said simply. Not slowly, but gradually. Each day that passed with me, you got weaker, sicker. I didn't have enough milk because I was malnourished. I didn't have warm enough clothes for you because I couldn't buy anything. I didn't have a home where you'd be safe because I myself had no home. She turned to look at him directly. The night before I took you to the orphanage, you almost died in my arms. You were blue with cold, could barely breathe. I warmed you against my body all night, singing lullabies my mother used to sing to me, promising that if you survived until dawn, I would find a way to give you the life you deserved. Benjamin listened in silence, and Mary Catherine continued. When morning came and you opened your eyes, I knew my promise meant letting you go, because I loved you too much to let my pride and my desire to be your mother slowly kill you. But other women manage. Poor women raise children every day. Yes, they manage, and maybe I was a coward for not trying longer. Maybe I should have fought harder, looked for more options, but I was 18 years old, alone in the world, and terrified that each passing day might be your last. Mary Catherine stood and walked to the roses, gently touching one of the flowers she had tended with such care. I wrote that letter with tears falling on the paper. I explained everything I could explain to a child. I said I loved you more than my own life, and that it was exactly because of that I was giving you to people who could care for you properly. She turned to him. Were they good to you? The Murphy family, the family that adopted me. They gave me education, love, opportunities. They always knew I was adopted and never hid that from me. I'm glad, Mary Catherine said, and it was true. I'm so glad. But I always wondered about you. I always wondered if you still thought about me, if you regretted the decision, if you would someday try to find me. Mary Catherine turned to him. I thought about you every day of my life. I wondered if you were okay, if you were happy, if your adoptive parents loved you like I would love you if I could. On each of your birthdays, I would buy a small gift and keep it in a box, imagining how you looked, what kind of man you were becoming. Do you still have those gifts? No. When I moved from Texas, I had to leave many things behind. But I kept the letter I wrote for you, the same letter you have. Benjamin took out the yellowed envelope from his pocket. This letter changed my life. When I turned 21, the Murphys gave it to me and said if I wanted to look for you, they would support me. Why did you wait 3 years to start looking? Benjamin hesitated. Because I was angry. Angry about being abandoned, even knowing the reasons. Angry about not having a mother to teach me things that men don't know how to teach. Angry about feeling incomplete, as if a piece of myself was missing. Mary Catherine felt her heart break a little more. And now? Are you still angry? Benjamin studied her for a long moment. I don't know what I feel, it's confusing. On one hand, I understand your reasons. On the other hand, I feel like I lost 24 years with you." "You did lose them," Mary Catherine said honestly. "We both lost them, and that's my fault." "Not just yours," Benjamin said, surprising her. "Circumstances are also to blame. Poverty is to blame. The lack of support for women in your situation is to blame." They remained in silence for a moment, each lost in thought. "Mary Catherine," Benjamin said finally, and something in her chest warmed to hear her name on his lips. "What do you want now? Now that you've found me or I've found you?" It was the question she had been asking herself since the moment she first saw him 3 days earlier. "I want to know the man my baby became," she said honestly. "I want to know about your life, your dreams, your struggles. I want to discover if there's still room in your life for a mother who failed you once. And if I say yes, if I say I want to try to build some kind of relationship," Mary Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes, "then I would say it would be the greatest gift life has ever given me." Benjamin stood and walked to her. For a moment, Mary Catherine thought he would leave, that the entire conversation had been a mistake. But instead he stopped in front of her and extended his hand. "Then let's start again. I'm Benjamin Sullivan, your son. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Mary Catherine." Mary Catherine looked at the extended hand, then at the face of the man who had grown up without her, and felt as if she were being offered a second chance she didn't deserve, but for which she was infinitely grateful. She extended her own hand and placed it in his. "I'm Mary Catherine Sullivan, your mother. And you are the miracle I never thought would happen again in my life." When their hands touched, it was as if 24 years of separation began to heal with that simple contact. It wasn't complete forgiveness, it wasn't instant reconciliation, but it was a beginning. And sometimes, Mary Catherine thought, a beginning is all we need to rebuild what was broken. Benjamin left that afternoon with the promise to return the next day. He wanted time to process everything he had discovered, and Mary Catherine respected his need for space. But after he left, she felt as if she were floating between two worlds, the relief of finally having told the truth and the terror that he might change his mind and decide it was better to keep his distance. Samuel found her in the kitchen, standing at the window, watching the point on the road where Benjamin had disappeared. "How did it go?" he asked gently. "Better than I expected. Worse than I expected. I really don't know," she replied honestly. Samuel approached and stood beside her. Was he angry? At first, yes, but I think he understands, at least intellectually, why I did what I did. Emotionally, well, that will take time. That night during dinner, they talked about everyday things, carefully avoiding the topic that dominated both their thoughts. But Mary Catherine noticed how Samuel watched her, as if he were worried she might disappear at any moment. It was only when they went up to their rooms that the reality of the situation hit them fully. "Samuel," Mary Catherine said, stopping in the upstairs hallway, "you need to know that now that Benjamin has found me, maybe it would be better if I left. I don't want to cause more scandal, and with Margaret already suspicious—" "Do you want to leave?" he asked. Mary Catherine hesitated. "No, but maybe it would be the most sensible thing." "Then don't leave, not yet. Not until we know what Benjamin wants, what you two decide about the future." She nodded, grateful for more time in this place that had begun to feel like home. It was during the early hours that the storm arrived. Mary Catherine woke to the sound of distant thunder, but quickly realized there was another sound mixed with the storm, muffled sobs coming from somewhere in the house. She dressed quickly in a robe and left her room, following the sound down the hallway. She stopped in front of the door she knew Samuel always kept closed, James's room. The door was slightly ajar, and through the crack she could see Samuel kneeling on the floor beside a small bed, holding something against his chest, while crying with a pain so deep that Mary Catherine felt her own tears spring up. She hesitated for a moment, not wanting to invade such a private moment of grief, but another thunder rumbled across the sky, followed by a particularly heartbreaking sob from Samuel, and she couldn't simply return to her room. She knocked gently on the door. "Samuel?" He startled, quickly trying to hide what he was holding and dry his tears. "Mary Catherine, forgive me if I woke you." She entered the room slowly. It was clearly a child's room, a small bed with a blue quilt, shelves full of children's books, toys organized carefully in corners that hadn't been disturbed in years. It was a preserved sanctuary, a place where time had stopped 4 years ago. "You didn't wake me." "It was the storm," she said softly. Samuel was still kneeling on the floor, and Mary Catherine saw he was holding a small wooden horse, clearly handmade, with details carefully carved. "James died on a night like this," he said, his voice hoarse from crying. "Storm thunder. Elizabeth and I took turns caring for him, trying to bring down his fever, but we couldn't. He was so small, so fragile." Mary Catherine knelt beside him on the floor. "How long was he sick?" 3 days. 3 days of hell, watching our son weaken and not being able to do anything. The nearest doctor was 2 days' travel away, and with the storm..." His voice broke completely. Mary Catherine looked around the preserved room, finally understanding the depth of Samuel's pain. It wasn't just the loss of a son, it was the loss of an entire future, of all the dreams he and Elizabeth had built around this child. "Tell me about him," she said softly. Samuel looked at her with surprise. "What? Tell me about James. What kind of boy was he?" Samuel hesitated, as if he wasn't used to talking about his son in terms of life, only death. He was full of energy, always asking questions, always wanting to help with the farm work. He loved horses, especially a mare named Buttercup. A weak smile appeared on Samuel's face. He used to say that when he grew up, he was going to have a ranch with 100 horses, and he was going to teach each one of them to dance. Mary Catherine smiled through her own tears. "Dance?" "Yes, because he said horses that knew how to dance would never be sad, and James didn't like to see anyone sad." Samuel held the wooden horse tighter. "I carved this for him the Christmas before he died. He called it Ranger and carried it everywhere. He was sleeping with it the night he..." He couldn't finish the sentence. Mary Catherine extended her hand and gently touched the wooden horse. "May I?" Samuel hesitated, then placed the toy in her hands. Mary Catherine examined it carefully, admiring the delicate work, the way Samuel had carved even small details like the mane and hooves. "It's beautiful. You can see the love in every carving." Samuel watched her holding his dead son's toy, and something moved in his chest. There was something healing in the way she touched the horse, as if she understood that it wasn't just a toy, but a symbol of paternal love that survived loss. "Elizabeth could never enter this room after James died," he said. "She said it was too painful. But I come here sometimes, especially during storms." "Why?" "Because it was during storms that he was afraid. He used to run to our room and hide under the blankets between Elizabeth and me. And I can still hear him sometimes calling for us." Mary Catherine carefully returned the wooden horse to Samuel. "He calls you because he loves you, even now. Love doesn't die when people die, Samuel. It just changes form." Samuel looked at her through tears. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've loved my son for 24 years, even without knowing where he was or if he was still alive. Mother's love, father's love. They're types of love that transcend time and space. James still loves you. He's still with you in a way we can't see but can feel." A particularly loud thunder rumbled over the house, and Samuel involuntarily flinched. "Elizabeth used to say that thunder was God rearranging furniture in heaven," he said. "James found that hilarious." Mary Catherine smiled. "My mother used to say that thunder was angels playing drums to celebrate souls arriving in heaven." They remained kneeling in the quiet room, listening to the storm outside. Gradually, Samuel stopped crying, but he didn't move to leave. "Mary Catherine," he said finally, "may I ask something?" "Of course. When you gave Benjamin to the orphanage, how could you? How could you walk out of that place without him?" Mary Catherine closed her eyes, remembering the worst day of her life. "I couldn't on the first try. I arrived at the orphanage door, looked at him sleeping in my arms, and simply couldn't go in. I walked with him around the city for 2 hours, holding him, singing to him, memorizing every detail of his face." She opened her eyes and looked at Samuel. "Finally, I returned to the orphanage, because I knew that if I didn't do it at that moment, I might never have the courage again. And he deserved more than a mother who didn't have the courage to do what was best for him. It must have been the hardest thing you've ever done." It was. And today, when I saw him again, it was as if that pain from 24 years ago came back all at once. But it was also as if a part of me, that had been dead for decades, came back to life. Samuel studied her for a long moment. "You're lucky," he said finally. "You have a second chance with your son. That's more than most of us get." Mary Catherine nodded, understanding the weight of what he was saying. You can have a second chance too, Samuel, not with James, but with life, with happiness, with love. How? By honoring his memory, by living in a way he would approve of. James wanted everyone to be happy, didn't he? So be happy. Not because you forgot him, but because you remember him with love instead of just pain. Samuel looked around the preserved room, then at the wooden horse in his hands. I don't know if I know how to do that. Mary Catherine stood and extended her hand to him. Then maybe we can learn together. Two people who lost children, finding a way to honor that loss without letting it define the rest of our lives. Samuel looked at the extended hand, then took it and stood up. Do you think James would approve of me? Mary Catherine smiled. I think any child who wanted to teach horses to dance so they would never be sad would approve of any person who brought a little light back into his father's life. They left the room together, and Samuel gently closed the door. But for the first time in 4 years, he didn't lock it. Outside, the storm was passing, and the thunder was moving away in the distance. But something had changed in the Whitmore house that night. Something related to healing, forgiveness, and the possibility that even very wounded hearts could learn to love again. Benjamin returned the next morning, as promised, but Mary Catherine immediately perceived that something had changed. He was more tense, his shoulders rigid, and he avoided direct eye contact with her. Did you sleep well? She asked, offering him coffee on the back porch where they had talked the day before. Not much, he admitted, accepting the cup, but remaining standing instead of sitting. I've been thinking a lot about our conversation yesterday. Mary Catherine felt a knot form in her stomach. And did you reach any conclusions? Benjamin hesitated, looking toward the fields that stretched beyond the property. In town last night, I heard some interesting conversations at the hotel. The knot in her stomach tightened. What kind of conversations? About you. About your situation here. Apparently your presence has caused considerable speculation. Mary Catherine sat slowly in the porch chair. What kind of speculation? Benjamin finally looked her in the eyes. The kind that can harm both your reputation and Mr. Whitmore's. People are asking questions about a mysterious woman, living alone with a widowed man, and now that I've appeared looking for you. He left the sentence unfinished, but Mary Catherine understood perfectly. Now they're connecting the dots and creating an even more scandalous story. Exactly. A woman with a questionable past, a son appearing out of nowhere. You can imagine the conclusions they're drawing. Mary Catherine stood and walked to the porch railing, gripping it tightly. And does that bother you? The gossip? Benjamin approached her. It doesn't bother me for my sake, but it bothers me for you, and it bothers me for the position you're putting Mr. Whitmore in. At that moment, Samuel appeared, coming from the stable. He immediately noticed the tension between Mary Catherine and Benjamin. Good morning, Benjamin. Is there a problem? Benjamin turned to him. Mr. Whitmore, may I speak frankly with you? Of course. My mother's situation here, it's causing gossip in town. Gossip that can harm both her and you. Samuel joined them on the porch, his face serious. What kind of gossip? The kind that questions the propriety of a single woman living in a single man's house. And now, with my appearance, they're speculating about the kind of woman who has children appearing without warning. Mary Catherine felt her cheeks burn with shame. Samuel, on the other hand, seemed to become more determined. And what do you suggest we do about this gossip? Benjamin hesitated. Well, maybe it would be better if my mother found other accommodations, at least temporarily, until the situation calms down. No, Samuel said firmly, surprising both of them. That's not an option. Mary Catherine turned to him. Samuel, maybe Benjamin is right. I don't want to cause problems for you. You're not causing problems, the gossips are causing problems, and I don't make decisions about my life based on what gossips think. Benjamin stepped forward. With all due respect, Mr. Whitmore, this is a small community. Reputations matter, and if the situation continues like this, it could affect your business, your relationships with neighbors. My business is fine, thank you. And as for neighbors, Samuel paused. Any neighbor who judges a decent woman based on gossip isn't the kind of neighbor I value. Mary Catherine watched him, touched by his defense, but also worried about the possible consequences. But what about Margaret? She already expressed concerns, and if this reaches her ears, As if she had been conjured by the mention of her name, a familiar carriage appeared on the driveway. Margaret was returning, and this time she wasn't alone. A second carriage followed her, this one carrying several well-dressed passengers. "Trouble," Samuel murmured. Margaret descended from her carriage with precise and deliberate movements, clearly prepared for some kind of confrontation. The passengers from the second carriage also descended. Mary Catherine recognized the local church pastor and two women who appeared to be merchants' wives from town. "Samuel," Margaret said, her voice carrying formal authority, "I hope you've reflected on our last conversation." Samuel descended the porch steps to meet her, Mary Catherine and Benjamin remaining behind him. "Margaret, I wasn't expecting another visit so soon. Circumstances demand it. I brought with me Pastor Hargrove and Mrs. Morrison and Campbell. We believe a respectful intervention is necessary." Pastor Hargrove, a tall, thin man with a grayish beard, approached. "Samuel, my son, we know the last few years have been difficult for you, and we understand that loneliness can lead a man to make impulsive decisions." "What kind of impulsive decisions?" Samuel asked, his voice dangerously calm. Mrs. Morrison, a middle-aged woman with a hat too ornate for a morning visit, joined the conversation. "Oh, Samuel, you know very well what we're talking about. An unknown woman, living in your house without proper supervision. And now a young man appears claiming to be her son." "I don't claim to be her son," Benjamin interrupted. "I am her son." Mrs. Campbell, a younger woman with sharp eyes, looked Benjamin up and down. "And that only makes the situation more scandalous. A woman with a questionable past, an illegitimate son." "Benjamin is not illegitimate," Mary Catherine said firmly, descending the steps to join the group. "I was married when he was born." "Were you?" Margaret questioned. "And where is your husband now?" "Dead. He died before Benjamin was born." Pastor Hargrove intervened with a solemn voice. "Even so, Miss Sullivan." "Mrs. Sullivan," Mary Catherine corrected. "Mrs. Sullivan, your presence here has caused considerable disturbance in the community. Decent people are asking questions, and frankly, we don't have adequate answers to give." Samuel stepped forward, placing himself between the group and Mary Catherine. "The only answer they need is that Mary Catherine is my guest, and as long as she wants to stay, she'll be welcome in my house." Margaret exchanged significant glances with the other women. "Samuel, dear, we understand your compassion, but there are appropriate ways to help a woman in difficulty. The church has funds to assist needy widows. We can arrange proper accommodations in town." "She doesn't need charity," Samuel said. "She needs respect, which is clearly something lacking in this conversation." Mrs. Morrison straightened, offended. "How dare you suggest we're being disrespectful? We're trying to protect both your reputation and hers." "Protect her from what? From gossip created by people who have nothing better to do?" Pastor Hargrove raised his hand in a pacifying gesture. "Samuel, no one is questioning the lady's decency, but appearances matter. The Bible teaches us to avoid even the appearance of evil." "And what evil do you see here?" Samuel challenged. "A woman caring for a house, a woman working to earn her keep, a woman reunited with the son she hadn't seen in years?" Margaret approached him, lowering her voice, but not enough so the others couldn't hear. "Samuel, you're playing dumb. This woman clearly has ulterior motives. She appears out of nowhere, installs herself in your house, and conveniently her lost son finds her here. It's obviously a scheme to take advantage of your good nature." The accusation floated in the air like poison. Mary Catherine felt as if she had been slapped. "How dare you?" she began, but Samuel interrupted her. "Margaret, that's enough." His voice was low, but there was controlled fury in it that made everyone step back. "You've crossed a line." "Samuel, no. I'm going to speak now, and you're going to listen. Mary Catherine Sullivan is a decent woman who found herself in difficult circumstances. She works harder in one day than most people work in a week. She brought life back to a house that was dying, and she has a more generous heart than anyone in this group." He looked at each member of the visiting group. "If this offends your sensibilities, if this disturbs your notions of propriety, then I suggest you find something more productive to occupy your time." Mrs. Campbell stepped forward. "And if we refuse to accept this situation, if the community decides it can no longer do business with someone who openly defies moral standards?" The silence that followed was tense as a rope about to break. Samuel looked at each face in the group, seeing the cold determination in their eyes, and something inside him hardened like tempered steel. "Then the community will discover it can live very well without my business," he said, his voice cutting like ice. "And I will discover I can live very well without a community that judges decent people based on malicious gossip." Benjamin, who had remained silent during the entire confrontation, finally spoke. "Maybe there's a solution that would satisfy everyone." Everyone turned to him, and Mary Catherine felt her heart sink. She recognized the tone in his voice. It was the tone of someone about to make a sacrifice they believed necessary. "What solution?" Margaret asked, clearly interested. Benjamin looked at Mary Catherine, and she saw pain in his eyes, but also determination. "My mother can come with me. I have property in Colorado, a small ranch I inherited from my adoptive father. She would be welcome there, and there would be no questions about propriety or reputation." Mary Catherine felt the world move under her feet. Benjamin was offering exactly what she had dreamed of for 24 years, a chance to be with her son, to know him, to maybe build the relationship they had lost. But the price would be leaving Samuel, leaving this place that had become home, leaving the only real happiness she had found in decades. "That would be an excellent solution," Margaret said quickly. Mrs. Sullivan reunited with her son away from complications, and Samuel free to rebuild his life properly. Pastor Hargrove nodded approvingly. "A wise solution that benefits everyone involved." Samuel looked at Benjamin with an expression that mixed respect and something that might have been betrayal. "And if Mary Catherine doesn't want to leave?" Benjamin turned to her, and Mary Catherine saw he was struggling with deep emotions. "The decision is yours, but I would like you to consider the offer. I have much to make up for, many lost years to recover. And," he hesitated, "it would be good to have a family again." The word family hit Mary Catherine like a physical blow. It was everything she had always wanted, everything she had prayed for on lonely nights for more than 2 decades. Her son was offering not just acceptance, but a place in his life, a home. But when she looked at Samuel, she saw something in his eyes that made her hesitate. It wasn't possessiveness or selfishness, it was pain. The pain of a man who was about to lose something precious again, but who was willing to let it go if it was best for the person he loved. "I need to think," she said finally. Margaret smiled, clearly satisfied for having planted the seeds she hoped to plant. "Naturally, but I hope you don't take too long to decide. Situations like this have a tendency to complicate with time." The group left shortly after, leaving Samuel, Mary Catherine, and Benjamin alone on the porch. The silence between them was charged with unresolved tensions and pending decisions. "I'm going to let you talk," Benjamin said finally, "but I expect an answer tomorrow. If you decide to come with me, we'll leave on Monday." After Benjamin left, Samuel and Mary Catherine remained on the porch, neither knowing exactly what to say. "It's a good offer," Samuel said finally. "It is. He's a good man. You can see he was well raised, that he has solid principles." "Yes." Samuel turned to look at her. "So why don't you seem happy about the prospect?" Mary Catherine turned to face him, and Samuel saw tears shining in her eyes. "Because I spent 24 years dreaming of the day my son would offer me a place in his life. And now that day has come, I discovered there's something else I want as much as that." "What?" "You," she said simply. "I want to stay here with you. I want to continue caring for this house, caring for you. I want to plant flowers in spring and preserve fruits in autumn. I want to hear your stories about James and Elizabeth and help you honor their memories while building new, happy moments." Samuel approached her, raising his hand to gently touch her face. "Then stay. It's not that simple. If I stay, I'll lose my son again. If I leave, I'll lose you. And I don't know how to make that choice." Samuel kissed her then, gently and softly, a kiss that contained all the words he didn't know how to say. When they separated, he rested his forehead against hers. "Then maybe you don't need to make that choice. Maybe there's a third option." "What option?" Samuel smiled, and it was a smile she hadn't seen before, a smile full of possibilities and hope. "Marry me." Mary Catherine stepped back, looking at him with shock. "Samuel, I'm serious. Marry me, be my wife. Then Benjamin will know he has a home here, a place where he belongs. and Margaret and her friends won't have anything more to gossip about. Are you proposing marriage to silence the gossips? I'm proposing marriage because I love you, he said, and the words came out of him as if they had been waiting to be said for weeks. I love the way you brought life back to this house. I love how you fixed James's photograph with such care. I love how you see beauty in broken things and find ways to heal them. Mary Catherine felt tears running down her face. Samuel, I love you too. But marriage, it's a very big step. It is. But we've already taken so many small steps together. Maybe it's time to take a big one. They remained on the porch until sunset, talking about possibilities and fears, about the future and the past. And when night came, Mary Catherine knew her decision was made. She wouldn't choose between her son and Samuel. She would find a way to have both in her life or die trying. The next morning, Mary Catherine woke to the sound of rain hitting the windows. It was a soft, persistent rain that transformed the world into shades of grey and silver. She dressed quickly and went down to prepare coffee, but found the kitchen empty. Samuel had left early, leaving only a note saying he would be working in the distant fields. She knew he was giving her space to think, but his absence made the house strangely quiet and empty. Toward noon, Benjamin arrived, wet from the rain, and clearly anxious for an answer. Have you decided? He asked, shaking the water from his hat on the porch. Yes and no, Mary Catherine replied, offering him a towel. I decided I want to be in your life, Benjamin. I want to know the man you became. I want to hear about your dreams and fears. I want to be your mother, if you'll let me. Benjamin smiled, the first genuinely happy smile she had seen on him. But, he said, clearly sensing there was more. But I also decided I want to stay here, with Samuel. This place became my home in a way I didn't expect. Benjamin's smile disappeared. So you chose him over me? Again? No, Mary Catherine said firmly. I'm not choosing. I refuse to choose. I want both of you in my life. That's not realistic, Mother. I can't stay here indefinitely. I have responsibilities in Colorado, a property to manage. Mary Catherine approached him. Then visit. Come whenever you can. Write letters. Let me know your life, little by little, the way it should have happened if I had been a better mother from the beginning. Benjamin studied her for a long moment. And what about the scandal, the gossip? Mary Catherine took a deep breath. Samuel asked me to marry him last night. Benjamin startled. And you said yes? I said I needed to talk to you first. You're my son, Benjamin. Your opinion matters to me. Benjamin walked to the window, watching the rain fall over the fields. Does he love you? He says he does. And I love him too. Then why do you need my permission? Mary Catherine joined him at the window. Because I abandoned you once to give you a better life. I don't want you to think I'm doing that again, choosing my own happiness over our relationship. Benjamin remained silent for a long time, watching Samuel appear in the distance, walking through the wet fields toward the house. He's a good man, Benjamin said finally. He is. And you can see that he loves you. It's written in every movement when he looks at you. And you? How do you feel about this? Benjamin turned to her. I feel like maybe it's time to stop trying to recover the past and start building the future. A future where I have a mother married to a decent man, living on a beautiful farm, where I'll always be welcome. Mary Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes. You'll always be welcome, Benjamin. Always. Then marry him, with my blessing. That afternoon, while the rain continued to fall, Mary Catherine walked to the small cemetery on the hilltop where Samuel had buried Elizabeth and James. She found him kneeling in front of two simple stones, rain running down his hair and shoulders. I came here to ask permission, he said when he heard her approach, to ask Elizabeth if it was okay to love another person, to ask James if he would approve of a new mother in his life. Mary Catherine knelt beside him in the wet grass. And what did they say? Samuel smiled through the rain. I think they said yes. The wind changed direction when I asked the question, and for the first time in 4 years I didn't feel guilt for being happy. Mary Catherine took his hand, intertwining their fingers. Samuel, I want to marry you. I want to be your wife. I want to honor the memory of your family while we build ours. He turned to her, rain and tears mixing on his face. Are you sure? Even knowing there will always be a part of my heart that belongs to them? I'm sure. And there will always be a part of my heart that belongs to the lost years with Benjamin. But I think hearts can expand, Samuel. I think we can love what we lost and still have room to love what we found." He kissed her then, there in the cemetery, under the rain, with the tombstones of his first family as silent witnesses to their promise of a new beginning. When they returned to the house, wet but happy, they found Benjamin on the porch, clearly waiting for them. "So," he said, a smile playing on his lips. "So we have a wedding to plan," Mary Catherine said. Benjamin came down the steps and hugged his mother for the first time in 24 years. "Welcome to the family, Mother," he whispered. Finally. The days that followed the engagement were a whirlwind of preparations and revelations. Samuel had insisted on a simple but meaningful wedding in the farm's garden, under the oak tree that Mary Catherine had tended with such love. She initially protested, saying a discreet ceremony at the civil registry would be more appropriate. But Samuel was inflexible. "I already married once hiding from society," he said. "This time, I want the world to know I chose you, and I'm not ashamed of that choice." Benjamin had remained at the farm, helping with preparations and gradually opening up about his life in Colorado. In the evenings after dinner, he and Mary Catherine would sit on the porch, filling 24 years of untold stories. "Tell me about the Murphys," Mary Catherine said one night, as they watched the stars appear in the dark sky. Benjamin smiled, a warm smile that transformed his entire face. "They were wonderful people. Patrick Murphy worked as a carpenter, and Eileen took care of the house and me. They never hid that I was adopted, but they also never made me feel like I was less than a true son." "Do they have other children?" "They had a daughter, Rose, but she died of scarlet fever when she was 5, 2 years before they adopted me. I think I filled a void in their lives as much as they filled mine." Mary Catherine felt a pang of gratitude toward the Murphys, mixed with old jealousies. "Did they know I was looking for you?" "They knew. In fact, it was Patrick who taught me to track records, to follow clues. He said every man has the right to know his origins, even if he chooses not to maintain contact afterward." "And will they be happy to know you found me?" Benjamin laughed. "Eileen is going to cry with joy. She always said that someday I would meet the brave woman who gave birth to me, and then had the strength to give me away so I could have a better life." "Did she really say that?" "She did. Eileen always believed you gave me away out of love, not lack of it. She said only a very strong mother could make such a sacrifice." Mary Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes. "I would like to meet them someday." "I would like you to meet them. In fact," Benjamin hesitated, "I was thinking of inviting them to the wedding." Mary Catherine looked at him with surprise. "Would they come?" "If I asked them, they would come to the end of the world. And I think it would be important for all of us, for you to meet the people who raised me, for them to meet the woman who gave me life, and for me to see the two parts of my family together." The next day, Benjamin sent a telegram to Colorado. The response arrived the same day. "Leaving tomorrow, anxious to meet Mary Catherine. With love, Patrick and Eileen." Samuel watched the growing connection between Mary Catherine and Benjamin with a mixture of joy and melancholy. It was wonderful to see Mary Catherine reconnect with her son, but also a painful reminder of everything he had lost when James died. It was Mary Catherine who perceived his inner struggle. "You're thinking about James," she said, finding him one morning in the office looking at the repaired photograph. "I was imagining what it would be like if he had lived, if he would have grown up to be a man like Benjamin, strong, decent, caring." Mary Catherine sat on the arm of his chair. "I think he would have been like that. James had you and Elizabeth as parents. He would have grown up with the best examples of character and love." Samuel nodded, but she could see the pain was still present. "Samuel, may I suggest something?" "Of course." "What if we honored James at the wedding? Some small way to include his memory in the ceremony?" Samuel looked at her with surprise. "How?" "Well, you carved that wooden horse for him. What if we included it somehow? Maybe as part of the decoration, or as a symbol that although he's not physically present, his memory is part of our new family." Samuel considered the idea, and slowly a smile spread across his face. "Do you think it would be appropriate?" "I think it would be perfect. A way to show that we're not trying to forget the past, but build upon it." That afternoon, when Benjamin returned from a trip to town to get supplies, he found Samuel and Mary Catherine working together in the garden, preparing the space for the wedding. The oak was being decorated with simple ribbons, and Mary Catherine had planted white flowers in a circle around the tree. "Can I help?" Benjamin offered. "Of course," Samuel said. "In fact, there's something I'd like to ask you." Benjamin joined them, and Samuel hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Mary Catherine suggested we honor my son James in the ceremony. He died 4 years ago, when he was 8 years old." Benjamin nodded, remembering the photographs he had seen in the house. "It would be an honor to help include him somehow." Samuel seemed relieved. "Thank you. It means a lot to me that you understand." "Family is family," Benjamin said simply. "It doesn't matter if they're alive or dead, present or absent. They're part of who we are." Mary Catherine watched the two men working together in the garden and felt something settle in her heart. This was her family now. Not perfect, not traditional, but real and full of love. That night she wrote in her diary for the first time in years, "Tomorrow, Patrick and Eileen Murphy arrive to meet the woman who gave birth to the son they raised. In 3 days I'll marry Samuel Whitmore under the oak tree I planted with hope. Benjamin will be there to give us his blessing, and James's memory will be honored as part of our new family. For 24 years, I believed I had lost my chance at happiness when I gave Benjamin to the orphanage. But maybe life isn't about second chances. Maybe it's about having the courage to accept the opportunities that appear, even when they come in ways we never imagined. Tomorrow begins the next chapter of my life, and for the first time in decades I'm anxious to see what it holds." The Murphys arrived in a hired carriage Friday afternoon, and Mary Catherine felt her stomach churn with nervousness when she saw Patrick help Eileen down. They were middle-aged people, he tall and thin with greyish hair, she small and plump with kind eyes that immediately sought Benjamin. "My boy," Eileen exclaimed, opening her arms for Benjamin, who rushed to embrace her as if he were still a child. Patrick watched the reunion with a smile, then approached Mary Catherine, who remained hesitant on the porch. "So you're Mary Catherine," he said, his voice carrying a slight Irish accent. "The woman who gave birth to our son." Mary Catherine nodded, not trusting her voice. Eileen approached after hugging Benjamin, and Mary Catherine prepared herself for anything. Coldness, resentment, judgment. Instead, the older woman took her in a warm, firm embrace. "Thank you," Eileen whispered in her ear. "Thank you for giving us the greatest gift of our lives." Mary Catherine began to cry, 24 years of guilt and regret pouring out in tears of relief. "I thought you would hate me," she said through sobs. Eileen stepped back, holding Mary Catherine's shoulders. "Hate you? Dear, you're the reason our Benjamin exists. How could we hate someone who gave us so much joy?" Patrick joined them. "Benjamin told us about your circumstances when you gave him to the orphanage, about losing your husband, about having no resources. You did what any loving mother would do, put the child's welfare above your own desires." Mary Catherine looked between the Murphys and Benjamin, seeing acceptance and understanding where she had expected to find accusation. "I don't know how to thank you for taking such good care of him. He took care of us as much as we took care of him," Eileen said. "He brought joy back to our lives after we lost our Rose." Samuel approached the group, clearly nervous about meeting the people who had raised Benjamin. "Mr. and Mrs. Murphy, welcome. I'm Samuel Whitmore." Patrick extended his hand. "We heard a lot about you, Mr. Whitmore. Benjamin told us you're a man of principles who defended Mary Catherine when others judged her. I just did what was right." Eileen studied Samuel with the sharp eyes of a mother evaluating a suitor. "And do you love her?" "With all my heart." "Then that's all we need to know." That night, the 5 of them dined together in the kitchen Mary Catherine had transformed, sharing stories and filling years of separation. The Murphys shared memories of Benjamin's childhood, his first steps, his mischief, his dreams of being a cowboy. "He always said that someday he would find his real mother," Eileen recounted. "Not because he didn't love us, but because he felt like a piece of his story was missing." "And now?" Mary Catherine asked. Benjamin smiled. "Now, I feel like I have 2 families, one that raised me and gave me love when I needed it, and another that gave me life and now gives me the opportunity to know my origins." Samuel, who had been quiet during much of the conversation, finally spoke. "I have a question, if you'll permit me." Everyone turned to him. "Benjamin, would you like me to consider you as a son? Not trying to replace the Murphys, but as part of our family." Benjamin was clearly moved by the question. "It would be an honor." "Then I'd like to ask, Would you accept being my best man at the wedding tomorrow? The silence that followed was charged with emotion. Benjamin looked between Samuel and Mary Catherine, understanding the full meaning of the request. Yes, he said, his voice hoarse. It would be an immense honor. On the morning of the wedding, Mary Catherine woke to the sound of birds singing and the scent of flowers floating through the open window. It was a perfect day. Clear blue sky, gentle breeze, ideal temperature. Eileen helped her dress in the simple but elegant dress they had bought in town, navy blue with white lace, appropriate for a widow marrying again. "Are you nervous?" Eileen asked, arranging Mary Catherine's hair. "Terrified," Mary Catherine admitted, "and happier than I thought possible. That's the perfect combination for a bride." Downstairs, Samuel was dressing with the help of Benjamin and Patrick. He had chosen his best suit, the same one he had worn to his wedding with Elizabeth, but which now seemed to symbolize not the past, but the possibility of the future. "Any regrets?" Benjamin asked, helping Samuel with his tie. "About the wedding?" "Never. About the circumstances that brought us here?" "Not either. Everything in life prepared us for this moment." The guests were few but significant. Pastor Hargrove had agreed to officiate the ceremony after Samuel made it clear that, with or without his participation, the wedding would happen. Some genuinely friendly neighbors had come, curious but respectful. Notably absent was Margaret, who had sent a formal letter expressing her inability to attend such an event. Samuel had read the letter and thrown it into the fire without comment. The ceremony was held under the oak tree, as planned. Mary Catherine walked through the garden she had tended with such love, her arm linked with Benjamin's, who would give her away to Samuel. On a small table beside the pastor was the wooden horse Samuel had carved for James, now decorated with a blue ribbon. It was a quiet but powerful way to include the memory of the lost boy in the celebration of the new family. "Beloved," Pastor Hargrove began, "we are gathered here today to unite Samuel Whitmore and Mary Catherine Sullivan in marriage." Mary Catherine barely heard the formal words. She was focused on Samuel's face, on the eyes that had seen her at her worst moment and chosen to love her anyway. She was thinking about Benjamin, standing beside Samuel as best man, finally part of a complete family. She was thinking about James, whose memory was honored in this new beginning. "Samuel," the pastor said, "do you take Mary Catherine as your wife to love and honor in joy and sorrow, in health and sickness, until death do you part?" "I do," Samuel said, his voice firm and clear. "Mary Catherine, do you take Samuel as your husband, to love and honor in joy and sorrow, in health and sickness, until death do you part?" Mary Catherine looked at the man who had brought life back to her heart, then at the son she had found again, then at the Murphys who had cared for that son with such love. "I do," she said. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Samuel, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was gentle, full of promises and hope. When they separated, Mary Catherine saw tears in Samuel's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Whitmore," he whispered. The celebration that followed was simple but joyful. Eileen had insisted on preparing a cake, and Patrick had brought a violin that he played Irish melodies that made everyone dance on the grass. As the sun set, the guests gradually departed, leaving only the new family. Benjamin and the Murphys would stay a few more days before returning to Colorado, but everyone knew this wouldn't be a permanent goodbye. "Thank you," Mary Catherine said to Samuel as they cleaned up the remains of the party. "For what?" "For giving me not just a husband but a family, for including Benjamin, for honoring James, for accepting my complicated past." Samuel stopped what he was doing and drew her into his arms. "Thank you for accepting a wounded man and helping him heal, for bringing life back to this house, for teaching me it's possible to love again without dishonoring what we lost." That night, as Mrs. Samuel Whitmore, Mary Catherine lay down in her new life and knew that finally she had found her place in the world. Montana, 1899. Mary Catherine Whitmore sat on the porch that had become her favorite place in the world, watching the activity in the farm's yard. At 52 years old, she had completely silver hair now, but her eyes shone with a contentment that had eluded her for decades of her life. The property had prospered in the 10 years since her marriage. Samuel had expanded the herd, built new stables, and the house had been enlarged to accommodate the growing family that had developed over the years. Benjamin had kept his promise to remain part of their lives. He visited at least 3 times a year, bringing his wife Ruth and their 2 small children, James, 7 years old, named in honor of the half-brother he never knew, and Elizabeth, 5 years old, whose name honored Samuel's first wife. "Grandma Mary!" little Elizabeth shouted, running across the grass toward the porch, her blonde braids flying behind her. "Grandpa Sam is teaching James to carve, and I want to learn too." Mary Catherine smiled, taking her granddaughter onto her lap. "And what do you want to carve, my dear?" "A cat, a big fat cat like Whiskers." Whiskers was the orange cat that had appeared at the farm 2 years earlier and decided to stay, despite Samuel's initial protests that they didn't need a useless cat. "I'm sure Grandpa Sam will be happy to help you," Mary Catherine said, "but first let's see how James is doing." They walked together to the stable, where Samuel was patiently guiding James through the basic movements of wood carving. The boy had his grandfather's intense concentration and Benjamin's stubborn determination. "Be careful with that tool," Samuel was saying. "Wood must be respected. It has its own personality, and you need to work with it, not against it." A weak smile appeared on Samuel's face. He used to say that when he grew up, he was going to have a ranch with 100 horses, and he was going to teach each one of them to dance. Ruth appeared beside Mary Catherine, drying her hands on an apron. She had adapted well to rural life and had become like a daughter to Mary Catherine. "They've been at it for 2 hours, Ruth said. "James is determined to make a perfect horse." "Like Uncle James's Ranger," little Elizabeth added solemnly. The original wooden horse carved by Samuel so many years ago now occupied a place of honor on the living room mantelpiece, a bridge between past and present that the children had naturally accepted as part of the family's story. "Where's Benjamin?" Mary Catherine asked. "Checking the horses with Patrick," Ruth replied. "He still can't believe you managed to convince the Murphys to move here." Mary Catherine smiled. 3 years earlier, when Patrick had developed joint problems that made his carpentry work difficult, Samuel had offered them a house on the property, in exchange for Patrick helping with small repairs and Eileen assisting with the children when Benjamin visited. "Family should stay together," Samuel had said, and the Murphys had accepted the offer with tears of gratitude. It was an unconventional family. 2 sets of grandparents, an adopted and recovered son, daughters-in-law and grandchildren, all united not just by blood but by choice and love. "Mrs. Whitmore." Mary Catherine turned to see a young rider approaching the house. It was the Morrison boy, clearly agitated about something. "What's wrong, Timothy?" "My mother sent word that Mrs. Caldwell, has returned to town. She arrived on the morning train." Mary Catherine and Ruth exchanged glances. Margaret had left Willow Pass shortly after the wedding, moving to San Francisco where, according to rumors, she had married a wealthy banker. Her presence hadn't been felt as a loss. "We appreciate the warning, Timothy," Mary Catherine said calmly. After the young man left, Ruth touched Mary Catherine's arm. "Are you worried?" "No," Mary Catherine said, surprised to realize it was true. "I'm not. 3 years ago, maybe I would be. But now I know who I am and where I belong. Margaret can't change that." Samuel appeared, clearly having seen the young messenger. "Did you hear about Margaret?" "Yes. Timothy Morrison came to warn us." Samuel studied his wife's face. "And how do you feel about it?" Mary Catherine smiled, taking his hand. "Curious maybe, but not afraid. She can't threaten me anymore, Samuel. I have a family now, a place that's mine by right, not by favor." That night the entire family gathered for dinner at the large table Samuel had built to accommodate everyone. Benjamin was telling stories of his latest adventures in Colorado. Patrick was arguing with Samuel about the best way to fix a problematic fence, and Eileen was trying to convince little Elizabeth to eat her vegetables. It was noisy, chaotic, and perfect. "Mary Catherine," Benjamin said during a pause in the conversation, "there's something I want to say." Everyone turned to him, and Mary Catherine noticed he seemed unusually serious. "When I was a child, I used to fantasize about finding my biological mother. I imagined what she would be like, what we would say to each other, if she would love me." He paused, looking around the table. "But I never imagined this. I never imagined finding not just a mother but an entire family. I never imagined having 2 fathers, 4 grandparents, a wonderful wife, and children who have more love than they know what to do with." Mary Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes. What I'm trying to say is, thank you for all the difficult choices that led to this moment, for giving me to the Murphys when I was a baby, for having the courage to reveal who you were when I appeared here, for marrying Samuel and creating this incredible home. He stood and walked to her, kissing her on the forehead. I'm grateful for every choice you made, Mother, because they all brought me here. Later that night, after the children were put to bed and the Murphys retired to their little house, Samuel and Mary Catherine sat on the porch as they did every night, watching the stars appear in the Montana sky. Do you regret it yet? Samuel asked, a question that had become a loving joke between them. Which part? Marrying you? Revealing my identity to Benjamin? Facing Margaret and her group of gossips? Any part? Mary Catherine considered the question seriously, as she always did. No, not for a moment. And you? Never, Samuel said, taking her hand. The best decade of my life. Even with all the complications. Especially because of the complications. They made everything more real, more valuable. Mary Catherine nodded, understanding. The happiness they had built wasn't simple or easy, but it was solid in a way that easy happiness never could be. Samuel, she said after a moment, there's something I want to do. What? I want to write our story, the real story, how we met, how Benjamin found us, how we built this family. For the children, for when they're older. Samuel smiled. Do you think it's a good story? I think it's a true story. And sometimes that's even better. Mary Catherine looked toward the house they had built together, not just the physical structure, but the emotional home that sheltered so many people and so many different stories. It was a testament to what was possible when wounded people had the courage to heal together, when broken families found ways to reunite, when love was given permission to grow in unlikely soil. You know, she said, I used to think my life had ended when I gave Benjamin to the orphanage, that I had lost my only chance at happiness. And now? Now I know that wasn't the end of my story. It was just the end of the first chapter. Samuel kissed her hand, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. And what story is this now? Mary Catherine smiled, looking through the lighted window where she could see Benjamin helping Ruth put the children to bed, where she knew the Murphys were reading together in their small house, where the memory of James and Elizabeth lived alongside the joy of the present. This is the story of how a family found itself, not through blood or circumstance, but through choice. The story of how love can grow in any soil, as long as it's watered with honesty and care. And under the infinite stars of Montana, surrounded by all the family she had gained through loss and found through courage, Mary Catherine Whitmore knew that her story had finally found the happy ending she had been waiting for so long. Montana, 1900, 1 year later. The letter arrived on a spring morning, brought by young Timothy Morrison, who now worked part-time delivering correspondence for the town post office. Mary Catherine accepted it with slightly trembling hands, not because she was nervous, but because the paper was expensive quality, and the envelope bore the name M. Caldwell in elegant script. From Margaret? Samuel asked, looking over her shoulder. It appears so. They sat together in the kitchen while Mary Catherine carefully opened the envelope. The letter inside was written in the perfect penmanship she remembered from Margaret, but the tone was completely different from what she expected. Dear Mary Catherine. The letter began, and the use of her first name surprised her immediately. I know my last presence in Willow Pass was not cordial, and I know I have little right to write to you now. But recent events in my own life have made me reflect on past choices and words I cannot take back. My husband passed away last month, leaving me again a widow, and this time truly alone. We had no children, and his family treats me as an intruder in their affairs. For the first time in my life, I understand what it means to be genuinely helpless. This experience made me remember you, how you came to Montana with nothing except courage, how you faced our community's judgment with dignity, how you built a family and a home through pure determination. I recognize now that I was wrong. I was wrong about you, about your intentions, about your character. I was wrong to try to separate you from Samuel, and I was especially wrong to make judgments about your life based on gossip and prejudice. I don't expect forgiveness, nor do I seek reconciliation, but I felt I owed you an apology, however late. You proved to be exactly the kind of woman Samuel needed, and he was fortunate to find you. I hope this letter finds you happy and prosperous. Respectfully, Margaret Caldwell. Mary Catherine read the letter twice before passing it to Samuel, who read it in silence, his eyebrows rising in surprise. Well, he said finally, I didn't expect that. Neither did I. She sounds different, more human. Adversity sometimes does that to people, or reveals who they really are beneath all the pretenses. Mary Catherine folded the letter carefully. Should I respond? Samuel considered the question. What does your heart say? Mary Catherine thought about that. A year ago she might have felt vengeful satisfaction at Margaret's difficulties, but now, with her own life so complete and happy, she felt only sadness for the loneliness that showed through in the letter. I think yes, not to rescue a friendship, but because everyone deserves a little grace when they're suffering. That afternoon, Mary Catherine sat at the desk she now shared with Samuel and wrote her response. It was brief but gentle, expressing condolences for Margaret's loss and noting that sometimes life's difficulties taught us things that prosperity couldn't teach. She didn't mention possible visits or offers of help, but ended with, I hope you find peace and purpose in your next chapter. It was a response that acknowledged the past without nurturing grudges, that offered dignity without false intimacies. After sending the letter, Mary Catherine spent the rest of the day working on her latest project, a memorial garden she was creating in honor of all the people who had touched their lives. There were roses for Elizabeth and James, herbs for the Murphys, sunflowers for Benjamin, and in the center, a small oak tree she was growing from a seed from the tree under which she had married. It's beautiful, Ruth said, joining her with little Elizabeth, who immediately ran to help by watering plants that clearly didn't need water. It's my way of keeping everyone close, Mary Catherine explained, even when they're not physically here. Grandma Mary, Elizabeth said, dropping the watering can to tug at Mary Catherine's skirt. Can I plant something too? Of course, dear. What would you like to plant? The little girl considered the question seriously. Happy flowers. Flowers that make people smile when they're sad. Mary Catherine smiled, hugging her granddaughter. I think I know exactly the kind of flower you mean. That night, the entire family gathered for the weekly reading, a tradition Mary Catherine had started where someone read aloud while the others worked on handicrafts or simply relaxed. Tonight, it was Benjamin's turn to read, and he had chosen a book of Irish folk tales that Eileen had brought. Once upon a time, Benjamin began, in a land far away there was a woman who believed she had lost everything. Mary Catherine smiled to herself as she listened. Stories of people losing everything only to discover they had more than they imagined were particularly relevant to her. Later, after everyone had retired, Mary Catherine and Samuel took their usual nightly walk around the property. It was something they did every night when weather permitted, a moment to reconnect and reflect on the day. Thinking about Margaret, Samuel asked, noticing his wife's thoughtful silence. A little, but mainly thinking about how our lives take turns we never expect. How so? Mary Catherine stopped beside the memorial garden, gently touching one of Elizabeth's roses. When I was young, I thought I knew exactly how my life would be. I would marry Thomas. We would have several children. We would grow old together in a little house in Texas. It was a simple, orderly plan. And when that didn't happen, I spent years thinking my life was ruined, that all the choices I had to make after Thomas's death were just attempts to minimize damage. Samuel took her hand, intertwining their fingers. But they weren't. No, they were steps on a journey that was leading me here. To you, to this family, to this life that's much richer and more complex than anything I could have planned. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached the small cemetery where Elizabeth and James were buried. Mary Catherine visited here regularly, not out of sadness, but as a way to include their memories in daily life. Sometimes I talk to them, Samuel admitted. I tell Elizabeth about you, about the children. I tell James about Benjamin, about what it would be like to have an older brother. And what do you think they would say? Samuel smiled. I think Elizabeth would say I look more handsome when I'm happy. And I think James would ask if Benjamin knows how to carve horses. Mary Catherine laughed softly. Then maybe we should teach him on his next visit. Maybe we should. They walked back to the house, where warm light shone in the windows. It was a sight Mary Catherine never tired of seeing, her house, her family, her home. Samuel, she said when they reached the porch, there's something I want to say. What? Thank you. For what this time? Mary Catherine gestured toward the house, toward the gardens, toward all the life they had built together. For giving me a second chance. For not judging me for my past. For building a family that includes everyone, living and dead, related by blood and by choice. Samuel drew her into his arms. Thank you for accepting a broken man and helping me become whole again. They kissed under the Montana stars. Two people who had found love when they least expected it, who had built hope from loss, who had created a family that transcended all conventional definitions. Inside the house, Mary Catherine could hear the soft sounds of her family settling in for the night. Benjamin and Ruth talking quietly about plans for the next day, the children saying their nighttime prayers, the Murphys organizing their small house. It was the sound of people who loved each other, who cared for one another, who had chosen to be family despite all the reasons they might not be. You know, Mary Catherine said, I used to think family was something you received by the chance of birth, but now I know that the best families are those you choose consciously day after day. And would you choose this family again? Samuel asked. Knowing all the complications, all the challenges, Mary Catherine looked toward the house where her life had finally found its purpose, toward the man who had seen value in her when she couldn't see it herself, toward the land that had become sacred through love and care. I would choose it in every possible world, she said, in every life, in every version of the story. I would always choose you, choose Benjamin, choose this imperfect and complicated and absolutely perfect family. And under the infinite sky of Montana, surrounded by everything and everyone she loved, Mary Catherine Whitmore knew that her story had found not just a happy ending, but a legacy that would last for generations. It was a story of second chances, of love that grew in unlikely soil, of families that formed through choice as much as circumstance. It was a story of forgiveness, of herself and others, and of the courage to build something new on the foundations of what was lost. But above all, it was a story of hope, the hope that it's never too late to start over, that love can heal even the deepest wounds, and that sometimes when we lose everything, we discover we still have the most important thing of all, the capacity to love and be loved. And that, Mary Catherine knew, was a heritage worth leaving for future generations. The certainty that no matter how broken a person might be, there is always still possibility for healing, always opportunity for happiness, always hope of finding their way home.